Hey guys, Stephanie here with the Hydroponic Tower channel. Today I wanted to do a little tour and mostly do a Q&A. So I get a lot of questions about plants. I'm working on an ebook for you guys. The free version is almost done. It's full of meat, so definitely check the link below. I will get that in the link below as soon as possible. But what I have found is a lot of people new to growing food don't necessarily know the characteristics and the behaviors of some of these foods, which is totally normal. We all enter into learning at different stages. As a homeschooling parent, we talk a lot about the grammar stage where we're learning the language of things and the basic concepts of things, and then we get into the dialectic stage where we can start to apply some of that stuff we've learned, and then the rhetoric stage where you can go on to teach others how to do that. And a lot of you may still be in the grammar phase. Totally fine. But I want to address a lot of the questions, the repeat questions specifically that I get, to maybe help you through that grammar phase into really understanding your plants and why they may be behaving in a certain way and why certain things are happening, so that you can problem solve those things and have the greatest success. So let's dive in. The towers are going to look very different. If you go back and watch a garden tour, I'll actually link one in the description below, you will see the towers have changed drastically in just a couple of weeks. And today actually feels a little bit like fallout. The goldenrod is blooming, which is always for me like the first sign that fall is coming. But we are still in summer and we kind of peaked. And so I did a video, I don't know when, live on one of my platforms, and was talking about how the tomatoes had not peaked yet, and that when they peak, it's going to go downhill super fast. And that's exactly what happened. So this tower, if you guys have watched some of my past videos, used to be extremely full, and I'll show you another one that still is. And what happened is it peaked. We've had enormous amounts of rain. It rained all night long. I'm actually very, very tired because when it rains that hard for that long, I just can't sleep. It's just a little bit unnerving when you get that much rain, and we do get those kind of rainy days here. Usually we get them in the fall, so this much rain, and we don't often get a lot of thunderstorms here, and it was a thunderstorm. We've had quite a few thunderstorms come in the afternoons. These are dumping massive amounts of water on these towers, and I had said in another video that I felt like I was going to come out here and everything was just going to be melted off of these, like fall into the ground, because the rain is so hard. And that's pretty much what happened to the tomato tower. It just got waterlogged and got diseased really quickly. Now, I harvested most of those tomatoes. I have some ripening on the base, so it's totally fine. They're still gonna ripe. And then there's some still on here. And even though the leaves have disease, the fruit themselves look great. So I'm just letting those ripen. And then we're gonna take all of these plants out and transition this tower into a fall garden tower. So I have my seedlings going for that. I'm prepared for when that happens. And those fall crops are gonna grow really quickly when it does happen, when I do take those tomatoes out, because it's still pretty warm here. So they are gonna just take off really quickly. I actually put in a turnip last week and it is just tripled in size in just a week. So this tower is what that tower looked like just 2 days ago, and just like that, with all that rain and disease, they just go down really fast. So this one's going to be going down fast too. It rained at least 12 hours straight last night, and pretty significant rains. And it's just too much for these plants to bear that kind of water. I did harvest most of the tomatoes before the last few big rainstorms came to save those, and we still have lots of tomatoes coming off of here. So at this point, we are just trying to let them get as mature as possible, and then making sure we have seedlings ready to take all this out and replant it really quickly. I'll give these a good scrub. It's a good opportunity to clean these. I'll take out any plants that are still thriving, because there are some leeks and some other leafy greens in here, believe it or not. There's some pepper plants in all of these. This is a green bean plant that's already produced everything it's going to produce, so that can come out. So at this point, there's also an eggplant in there that I may leave in there. So I will be able to leave some things in this tower. I'll clean up the other parts when this one's ready to go down. But we're still a couple of weeks away from that. And if I can keep a couple of my tomatoes, like this one's looking really healthy, in the towers until our first frost. I can extend that tomato season up until that first frost. Some of these may make it. I have some smaller, younger tomatoes on other towers. It's why I diversify my tomato plants and I interval plant. So that is possible. I'm also going to be starting my micro dwarfs, which are what I'm going to be growing in the garage over the winter so that we have tomatoes year round. So there may be a gap where we don't have a lot of tomatoes, but I'm hoping I can keep some of these younger tomato plants or some of the ones I prune back, if I can ward off the disease on some of those, just so we can stay in tomatoes until our first frost. If the rain keeps going at the rate it's been going, I just don't know if that's going to be possible. All right, and here I have some calendula. So we are still harvesting herbs. I actually harvested a huge amount of greens off of this tower. This tower has a baby extension kit on top. But again, I am preparing, like this is getting leggy. This is my chamomile. It's starting to look rough. So I am preparing that a lot of this stuff is going to need to be turned over pretty soon. So staying on top of starting seeds this time of year is crucial. As you change seasons, staying on top of your seed starting is going to be your best bet in making sure that you constantly have food. Now I've got things like kale in here. These are young kale. These can continue to go for a long time. I'm not going to be taking those out, but eventually this calendula is going to burn out and the chamomile is starting to look rough. I'm actually going to cut that off and see if I can get a second flush of Roman chamomile off of this tower. Down here I have a jalapeno pepper. All right, and I want to address a few questions that I hear the most, or just some topics to maybe help you guys understand plants a little bit more. So tomatoes, they have their season. If you're in an extremely hot area, you're not going to be able to grow certain foods over the summer in the mature fruiting stage, because what happens is tomatoes, when they get super hot, the flowers will just fall off. They're not going to produce food in extremely hot weather. Or you may be in a region like me. I used to be from Florida, and we get a lot of high humidity, which is going to cause disease and things. So tomatoes, if you were to start them indoors, get them outside after your first frost, and then grow until the early summer. Start new seedlings and put your new seedlings in the dead heat of the summer in a tower garden, maybe protected by some of your squash or your eggplant or some of the things that can handle the heat, and I'll talk about some of those things in a minute. Then those seedlings are not going to struggle in the heat. It's when they're in the fruiting stage that they struggle the most, because we are consistently watering these, so they're not going to dry out. Most plants struggle in the heat because they burn up because they don't have enough water. We are not going to have that problem on an aeroponic tower garden, but you will have the problem that they're not going to fruit if they're super hot. So if you can roll your tomatoes out at the end of the spring, start new seedlings at the beginning of summer, and let those become your mature plants that will fruit in the fall, then you can have a double crop, depending on what zone you're in, of tomatoes both in the spring and fall, and kind of bypass those hot summer months. A lot of you guys are really struggling to grow food this summer because it's been so hot. You're not going to be able to grow greens and all of those things if your temperatures are consistently in the upper 90s. They just can't handle it. But you can modify your tower to things like eggplant that does love to be heat tolerant. I will say eggplant at the top of the tower in extremely high heat may not do as well as the bottom. You know, give it a little bit of shade. But you can also do melons. Melons love heat. Okra, you can grow okra in a tower. Lots of things like that. So you can tailor your tower to meet the temperatures and the situation. But then also use some of your grow ports to continue to grow things like peppers, because peppers can tolerate the heat. They may stop fruiting in extreme heat, but the minute it starts to cool off, they will kick back up, because the pepper is technically a perennial. So you can wait it out with things like peppers. You could start younger pepper plants in the summer, just like the tomatoes, so that those mature and provide your peppers for you in the fall. So just things to be mindful of if you are growing in these extremely hot regions. You can also insulate the outside of your tank, because the real situation is going to come with the water getting too hot. I've seen just like, it's not insulation like you think in a house. It's got like a reflective material on it. It's just like a roll of insulation, and you can wrap that around the base of your tank, and you can put your tank in one of those half whiskey barrels that they sell at the hardware store to create some insulation and keep your water cool. These do cool off at night because there's water going in here exposed to cooler air temperatures, and that can really help to keep your tank cooler. If you're in super cold regions, you can put water tank heaters inside your tank to warm the water and keep the water warmer. I've also seen people who take old tailgating tents that are from the thrift store that may have had ripped tops and replace those with garden shade, like shade cloth, and you can have that shade cloth roll down on sides. If you're getting beamed by the sun on a certain side of your tower, you can have it over the top just to add like 20%, 30%. Some of them go up to 50% shade, depending on how extreme your summers are and how much sun you get. And that's just a way that you can cool these off and really extend your growing season. We can get creative. We have a lot more options. I grow a lot more food out of season, even in my towers outside, just because I can modify things a little bit better. For example, I have celery. Celery is a cool weather crop. I have these on the top, and we're getting upper 90s on some of our days, and they're still doing fine. They taste amazing, and they're really thriving. And it's just because they're getting so much water, and because my tanks cool down at night, my water isn't extremely hot because we actually have cooler evenings here in the mountains. So it just allows for a little bit different gardening experience. So squash, I get a lot of questions about squash. People will ask me, this is winter squash. So these are winter, the difference between winter and summer, they're all just squash. It's just these are going to take longer, and then they have a harder shell so you can store them over the winter. Summer squash is going to be your zucchinis and your yellow squash and things like that. So these are winter squash. Summer squash, I get a lot of questions about. People will say, why do I only have male flowers, or why do I only have female flowers? So squash is a little bit slow to get going. It's why I say to be starting squash seeds every single month, and you will always have squash because you're going to have pest squash bugs, and squash can be a little bit finicky in the beginning. So typically what you're going to see is your squash will produce a bunch of male flowers, and then they'll stop, and then it'll produce a bunch of female flowers, and then those will stop, and none will come in at the same time so that they can pollinate themselves, and then they'll start to come in where you have male and female at the same time. So it takes a little bit of time, and some people just get really caught off guard by that because they don't understand why it's just one flower and then another. Cucumbers can be a little bit finicky like that too. Cucumber pollination rate's only about 30%, so I'll see a lot of people who will say, why are all my cucumbers dying? Because they'll have 30 flowers and the little cucumber rots off the end, and that's just why. They just have a lot of flowers, but not all of those cucumber are going to pollinate and become a cucumber. So that's something to be mindful with squash, is that yes, you may get all male flowers and then female. If you're interval planting and you have plants at different stages of blooming, then you have a better chance that one of your plants is mature and producing male and female flowers. When your other plant is only producing female, then you have a male flower. You can take and hand pollinate that female, or a bee can do it for you. So the more you have, the better your chances are. The other thing with squash is they're gonna produce male, then female. So you're gonna have this period where you don't have any fruit, even though you have all these flowers. And then they're gonna start to produce all this fruit. And then it's gonna get hot, and they kind of go into hibernation mode. And that's where mine are at right now. Because I grow on a tower, I can go lift up my plants and look for problems and manage the squash bugs and all of those things that typically wipe out squash plants for most people. I don't have to worry about those because I can manage squash bugs easily. Even on my winter squash, I literally just come out here and lift it up, and I look on the leaves for any squash bug eggs, and I look for any squash bugs. And because I can do that, I can really manage these plants well and keep them alive well and keep them growing for a really long time. But right now, none of mine are producing fruit. The winter squash are preparing to produce it, and it'll be ready by October. but the other ones, the summer squash, they're just kind of burned out. So I have younger ones going. I have new seedlings started. I have some plants that are just in the flowering stage, so I'm watching those very closely and staying on top of squash bugs for those young, immature plants. Because if we can cool off in the next 2 weeks, then my squash of those younger plants is going to just take off. My seedlings that I'm planting today are going to grow into my next harvest, and I'm going to go ahead and pull out all my mature squash this week. Replace those with some fall garden crops and some things I'm excited to get started growing, some things we haven't had in a while since it's been so hot. And just know that's just the nature of it. At some point, your squash are gonna stop producing and just lay there. And yes, you can just sit there dormant because it's too hot, almost like your tomatoes and sometimes your peppers. And to me, that's the point, to take them out and to have new seedlings started so you can have a whole nother crop in the fall. Peppers, on the other hand, I don't do that with. I just let them wait it out. I will harvest and keep harvesting off of them. But if I've got some bell peppers, like I've got some bell peppers right now that aren't producing a whole lot, it's just because it's really hot. But if I can just keep those healthy and happy, and another trick is harvest your peppers green on plants like that, because then it puts more energy into producing more fruit. Then when it cools off, those are going to start to really take off and give us a lot more abundance. And not cold, but just a little bit cooler, they're going to get happy. Also, as I pull these tomatoes and some of these bigger plants, they're going to get more sun and they're going to have more opportunity. Now we're getting lots of bell peppers, but not as many as I had hoped, and a lot of it's just because of where I placed them on the towers, and then they're not getting as much sun as I like. So those are some things for next year and every season when I'm growing that I'm taking note of. Like, I loved growing the dwarf tomatoes. I grew an enormous amount of dwarf tomatoes. I actually loved that the majority of them were on the same towers. It just made it easier. Where I went wrong, and I'll show you guys where I went wrong with this tower versus the one that's not as diseased, is I didn't put the cage all the way to the top. These cages are a little bit expensive and they come with 3 rings, so I have to buy extra cages in order to get them to the height of my extensions. I just decided not to make that investment this year because I had other things I was investing in. And so what happened is all of that heavy rain really pushed down on these for many days. We had rain for many days, and there just wasn't enough stability, so a lot of the branches got bent and broken, and it just caused disease to come onto these plants a lot faster than the other one that has a cage that is supported. Here is a pepper plant right here, a great example. Oh, there goes a tomato. So these we just let sit on the rim so they can mature. There's lots of tomatoes on here still doing great. This pepper plant is really starting to bloom. It's been a little bit shaded out. I have harvested off of this a little bit, but now it's time to let this one be the shining star, and it really is showing tremendous amounts of flowers and blooming. So even though I lost my tomatoes, I'm opening up an opportunity for more peppers, and then I will plant some more squash on this. Is actually what's going to go on here when I pull some of these tomatoes out. I've actually removed a few of them already. And so we just keep turning the food over, interval planting, keeping the food coming. I do have lots of tomatoes that look healthy still. Let me show you those. Towards the bottom here, this one's still going strong. It has some disease, but with a little cleanup and just keeping a close eye on this plant, I think I can get this one to take us through to the fall. Just because it has a little bit more room to breathe, and it's doing pretty good. We'll see. It's just a matter of time. And if not, then, you know, we got a lot of tomatoes off of it regardless. There's still tons in here that are maturing right now. And that's just part of gardening. All right, so I put you guys in the shade a little bit because we're getting these clouds and then blasts of sun, and my camera will overheat. But here I have a squash. This is a yellow squash, and you can see how mature it is. It goes all the way down. There's a squash bug right there. This one has a little bit of powdery mildew. I've been checking it for squash bugs, and it's got some fruit on the bottom. It's the only reason I haven't taken this one out, because I'd like to see if I can turn those into edible squash. If that's possible, I'll give this one another couple of days. Chances are it may give me 1 or 2 more squash, but this one does need to come out. And as soon as I have a plant to take its place, I'll just take it out and start over. So don't be afraid to cut your losses on that. I've already started new cucumbers up here. I have gorgeous pepper plants up here that are just getting started. These are ones that I planted as part of my interval planting that are not even producing food yet. So I've got some that are at the end of their production, some just getting started. And then I've got some baby plants around here as well for peppers that will feed us in the winter in the garage. I put in new cucumbers. So when we take out, here's another squash plant that's very mature, and look, it's just falling apart from all that rain last night. The bottom rotted. This needs to come out. This is not serving any purpose. It's diseased, it's worn out, it's not going to serve us. Half of it just fell off as I picked it up because of all the rain last night. So this one I will take out. In here I've got some, I broke apart some of my celery and added some new celery starts. So it's just a great opportunity to turn things over and get some fresh food going. I do the same with my green beans. I have lots of green beans ripening, but you always want to be starting new green bean plants when you're doing bush green beans because they do just burn out and need to be replaced. And I find that they need to be replaced more than you would in your soil gardens. When they start to get leggy and the leaves start to look rough and they're not producing an abundance of flowers, I just pop them out, stick another one in, and we're back in harvesting. With peppers, the more you harvest your peppers, the more they're going to produce peppers. So I like to come and just harvest anything that looks like it's ready. Here's a great one down here. And this is another example. This is a pepper that was getting a little bit shaded out, so the plant stayed smaller. So I ended up with these little squatty peppers, and I actually just broke off a limb when I did that, but that's okay because I want to actually prune this one and see if I can't get it to be a little bit stronger and produce some more. And just look at these gorgeous tomatoes here. So we've got some nice sized slicers coming off a dwarf tomato. Doing well. We'll hopefully keep these going for a while. All right, guys, I'm hiding under the plants because it got super sunny and hot, but I hope this answers some of your questions. If your green beans aren't producing fruit, it might be that it's too hot if the flowers are just falling off, and it may be a season where you just have to wait a couple of weeks. Be thinking about planting your fall gardens. Be thinking about transitioning. Always be starting new seedlings. The best way to solve a problem is to have a new seedling to take its place. If your green beans aren't producing and they just keep dropping their flowers, then obviously there's something going on with the temperatures or the humidity or something, the temperature of your water. And it may be, instead of like trying to problem solve that, it may be best to start over. Have another seedling to take its place. Have something you know for sure will grow in that spot, or something you can prepare for your winter gardens so that you have green beans in the winter. It may be just as simple as pulling that plant out and putting in a young seedling so that as we move into fall, you do have green beans in the fall and you're not starting in the fall when it's going to be too late. It's a good time to be thinking about what you want to grow over the winter. Definitely be planting your fall gardens. We grow, even if you're not growing year round and you're shutting your towers down in the winter, it's still a great opportunity with these to grow fall gardens. A lot of people don't grow fall gardens in the soil because come fall, they're exhausted. They're tired of being out in the heat and all the work, and they're just ready to shut it down. I've had that experience before. I just didn't even want to grow in the fall because it was so hot, and you know, this time of year it's just not fun to be out weeding and doing all those things on the soil. But because we aren't dealing with that, this pepper's like all up in my business here, because we're not dealing with that with these towers, plant your fall gardens. It's an amazing time to grow food in the fall. We can grow so many things on these towers in the fall. Your peppers are going to pop back up. The green beans love the fall, and we still have, I don't know if you guys can see this, I have tremendous amounts of eggplant and all sorts of things still on here, but I also just planted, here it is right here, this turnip just a couple of days ago, and in just a couple of days this has already grown. So it's a great time to get your fall crops in like this because they grow really, really fast. And then in a couple of weeks when the temperatures start to shift a little bit, you have amazing turnips to eat, and you can keep going through this cycle over and over and over again, because as it gets cooler, things won't grow as fast in cold weather. So take this opportunity to plant some things and get some nice size to them. Baby plants can handle the heat. Mature plants, not so much. So that's just something to be mindful of. Wanted to share my thoughts on this, answer some of those questions or topics that I get a lot. Happy gardening. I hope you guys have an amazing fall garden. You can watch some of my past videos, my seed starting videos, if you want to see what I'm growing this fall. And I'll be making more of those as we continue to plant, because we are planting every 2 weeks. Have a great night. I'll see you in the next video.